So I'm now joined by Swedish Whisky Girl. Hello, Swedish Whisky Girl. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hi there. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. I'm so glad you're here. I've been a fan of your page for quite some time since I set up English Whiskies. So I've enjoyed your videos and your reviews. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me.
Well, that's great to hear. And I mean, it's just nice in these times that you can kind of meet up virtually and chat to people right now.
Absolutely, yeah, it makes it a lot easier. So, but before we go into the English whiskies and your thoughts on English whiskies, just tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you go from being Swedish girl to Swedish Whisky Girl?
Yeah, that's a good question. I moved to Scotland to study professional dance, and during my last year, I was very set on moving back to Scandinavia, but I met my boyfriend, who's a very charming Scotsman, and he actually started working in the whiskey industry the day after we met.
Okay.
So we kind of got to exploring whiskies together, and he brought home some samples and he taught me about where the flavors came from. And that's what got my kind of nerd brain going, because I'm very nerdy about things. And whiskey's a great kind of category to be nerdy about, because the more you learn, the more questions you have, and it just keeps going. So yeah, it kind of started like that. And then I thought it would be fun to start Instagram. And at first, I was the PT because I started drinking whiskey by trying smoky whiskies,
Okay.
and thought that I was very much a Pete head, and I had aspirations to become a personal trainer. So I thought the PT was a clever name.
Okay. Yeah.
But it doesn't really roll. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. So eventually, I figured, well, I'm Swedish, I'm a girl, and I like whiskey, so I became Swedish Whisky Girl.
Oh.
And yeah, that's kind of how it all started. And yeah, people like the journey of my whiskey tale, so it kind of grew from there.
Perfect. And how long have you been on Instagram, and how long have you been sort of taking whiskey quite seriously in that way? How long has it been since you started up all your sort of social media channels and things?
It's been over 2 years. I think I started in May 2 years ago with the Instagram, and then now I've also recently started YouTube. And so it's great to kind of be part of the whiskey community, and I just love being creative. So having the blog and now the YouTube and the Instagram is a perfect me. It's definite to be able to work with it full time.
Absolutely, great. Well, so and going on to English whiskey, so that's of course why I've got you here to share your thoughts on English whiskey as well as being a fan of your page. And I noticed fairly recently on your YouTube channel you'd started to pick up on more English whiskies, and I saw some reviews coming through, which was great. So, do you remember the first time you'd heard about English whiskey and the first whiskey that you tried, and your initial thoughts on English whiskey?
Well, I've been quite surprised that it seems that English whiskey hasn't been a thing for that long. It's just over 10 years, isn't it?
Yeah, 2003-4, Hicks and Healy produced the first single malt whiskey. That was more like a collaboration between two companies, a brewery and a cider farm down in Cornwall. But it was the English Whisky Company, the first back in 2006, that set up a dedicated distillery. Yeah, so not long at all.
Yeah, no. And I think the English Whisky Company was actually one of the first I actually did try. And I think when I actually tried English whiskey as its own thing for real was just earlier this year when the Whiskey Lounge had an English whiskey festival, and they sent out tasting packs and had a few different varieties. And I'm always curious about international whiskies, but I've quite naturally been very curious about Scandinavian whiskies and Swedish whiskies. So when I realized that there was whiskey in Sweden and there's whiskey in so many places around Europe and around the world, I was like, oh, there must be whiskey in England, and kind of check that out. But it seemed quite quiet when that came around, and now it's just everywhere, which is amazing.
Absolutely. It seemed to be sort of like around 2013, 14, there's suddenly a bit of an explosion, but in terms of them setting up, but it's really in the last kind of 3 or 4 years that they're now starting to release whiskies. And it's, as we were just saying before we started this interview, that 2006 just one distillery, and now 24. But it seems every time I look online, there's another news story, another distillery opening up. So it's certainly growing at a great rate at the moment. So when you first tried those English whiskies, what were your initial thoughts? Were you quite impressed by the quality of the spirit? Because you're obviously someone who tastes a lot of different whiskies, and as you mentioned, whiskies from around the world. So did you think that English whiskey was really holding its own against some of those bigger players out there?
Yeah, definitely. What made me really happy was that I got the impression that English whiskey is not trying to be Scotch. It's trying to be very much its own thing. And I think they're succeeding wonderfully with it, because there's some distilleries like Lakes that are taking more of a sherry approach. And then you have other distilleries like the Spirit of Yorkshire, which actually have a rectifying still on one of their copper pot stills, which creates a completely different character and allows them to mix their new make as well to create another type of spirit style. So it's just great to see all these new distilleries that are very much taking whiskey very seriously, and they're learning from the traditions and history that whiskey has, but they're also making it their own.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot more, because as it stands at the moment, this is something I touched upon with Richard Foster from the English Whisky Society, and it was something that came up at the English Whisky Festival, the virtual festival, a week or so ago. That of course Scotland has very strict rules on what defines a Scotch whisky. Same with Ireland and same with bourbon in America. Whereas at the moment, although the English whiskey industry is following the European sort of regulations, at the moment, of course, with Brexit and things like that, there's a whole field open. So that's one of the discussions at the moment is, do we go down that kind of Scottish route of a real kind of a set of rules and regulations, or do we allow the experimentation to continue within English whiskey with slightly freer limits, but of course keeping the quality at the highest. So it does seem to be that, as you say, there's a lot of experimentation with things like English oak and certain casks that aren't used in other areas. So it's quite exciting. So out of the ones that you've tried, have you got any sort of particular favourites that you've really enjoyed?
I think that first tasting that I did back earlier this year, it was the Cotswolds that really stood out, because it had a really lovely spirit that had this kind of dense, rich character to it without being overly oaked, but also not being too separated in flavors. But then I was also really impressed with the Lakes whiskey, also because I got quite fangirly about Duval, who's their whiskey maker. He's so nerdy, and it just got me so excited. And then this most recent with the English Whisky Society, their festival, Cotswolds again, their peated cask, really nice. And then I think it was the Oxford Artisan Distillery that had a rye that's been done in Sauternes.
Yes, yeah.
Which I really enjoyed, because I think it was just very quirky, and I love quirky. So but I mean, it's just fun exploring all these different characters and seeing how very different they are. You would sometimes, when there's new distilleries, you kind of can expect what they're going to go for, something that's maybe a little bit more safe that's worked before. I think with English whiskey and these new expressions, you just see a lot of fascinating things coming that are very much their own unique character.
Absolutely, yeah. You pick up a similar thing to what Richard from the English Whisky Society was saying the other day about there's got a lot of there's a lot of experimentation, and we mentioned Oxford Artisan Distillery. Sort of, they've got a very different approach. You know, very much influenced by America in their rise, and of course the distiller being American as well, but using English oak in the maturation. So there's a lot going on there. So, are there any ones that you've seen that you're yet to try and you're quite keen to try?
I mean, there's always some. I actually tried an English whiskey that I haven't tried before yesterday, which was the new small batch from the English Whisky Company in the Cabernet Sauvignon matured whiskey.
Oh, okay, yes.
Which was also really lovely. But there's just so many that pop up in different places. I know there's a lot of distillers I haven't tried any spirit from yet, so they're definitely high up on the list. But I don't know if I can say a specific one, because I'm just curious about them all.
So for yourself, what's happening in the future for you? Have you got any exciting sort of projects coming up, or any sort of tastings? Or I know that you've been involved in a bit of judging and things like that. And so what's happening on the horizon for Swedish Whisky Girl?
Well, I have a few things that I can't really announce yet, but I'm sure they're coming soon. But I'm working on the blog at the moment, building it as a bit of a travel blog, including distillery visits and yeah, just a little bit of a mixture of Sweden and Scotland and all the other places I'm lucky enough to get to visit. And of course, building the Instagram, because I just taking photos, writing texts is kind of the core of what I like doing. And like I said earlier, it's really my big dream to be able to be my own boss full time and work with this full time instead of now kind of trying to balance my full time job and the creative content. But it's basically the blog, my YouTube channel, and Instagram that I'm working on continuously. And yeah, I'm tomorrow dressing up for Halloween and filming a Halloween review. So
Oh,
I guess
fantastic.
that's the next thing happening.
Oh, okay. And are you able to give us any clues as to what you'll be tasting tomorrow for that, or is that under wraps for now?
No, I'm happy to say it's the Brexit blend.
Oh, okay.
I mean, what's scarier than politics, right?
And on that note, before I leave you, what's can you just remind people of your website and Instagram and that kind of thing, so they can follow you? And because I've really enjoyed watching your reviews and your posts, and I've seen some whiskies that I've not heard of or tried, and got some tips from following your page. So can you just run past your social media accounts so people can follow you?
Oh, of course. And that's great to hear that you're enjoying the content. You'll
Absolutely.
find me at Swedish Whisky Girl on YouTube and Instagram. And my website is Moa Katarina Nilsson, moakatarinanilsson.com, which is my full name, which is it's a bit tricky because it's in Swedish, but you'll find it through both YouTube and Instagram, which is probably easier.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate that. And yeah, Swedish Whisky Girl, thank you very much.